Martin, thank you very much for joining us. And Mr. Martin is the 21st Prime Minister of Canada. And we're just so pleased to have you come and participate in our Pembina 25th Anniversary video series. Welcome, Mr. Martin.
Well, look, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Mr. Martin, how did you first become interested in sustainability or environmental issues?
Well, I think it goes back a long, long way. I grew up on the shores of Lake Erie. My first summer job, when I was about 13, I went down to the docks and I got a job on a fishing boat. And at that time, Lake Erie looked to me like the Atlantic Ocean, especially when you'd be five miles out. And essentially, the choice fish at that time was Lake Erie pickerel. And I remember probably about 2 years later, I had this summer job when I was about 15 or 16. The fishing industry fell way off, and it fell way off because, of course, A, the lake had been overfished, and B, there was a lot of talk about mercury in the water coming from the industry down the river or upriver, and in fact both. And I've got to say to you that all of a sudden, you know, the fact that the fishing industry, which is my job as a 13, 14-year-old, had suddenly disappeared. I was told by my parents that I couldn't eat the fish any longer. I think that really struck home very, very strongly. There's no doubt it. People watching this have never eaten Lake Erie pickerel, and it's come back now. I'm delighted to say Lake Erie pickerel is, without any shadow of a doubt, the best eating fish in the world. But that, you know, all of a sudden, that life had changed, and I visibly saw it as a very, very young teenager. Marked me for the rest of my life.
What do you think the biggest issue facing us today is?
Well,
I know that's a huge question, but what do you think?
Well, I don't think there's any doubt that it is climate change. If you're saying to me in terms of what's the issue that can cause the greatest long-term damage if it's not dealt with, what is the issue that is certainly affecting people worldwide. I spend an enormous amount of time in Africa. I mean, I can see the effects of climate change every time I go. Now, on the other hand, if you were to say to me, what is the most pressing issue at this moment? I'll tell you, I think it's the oil spill in the Gulf. I was very marked as a much younger person by the Exxon Valdez. I think most of us were. And again, perhaps it goes back to the spoilage in water. But I really do believe, and I think that this should be very important for Pembina, since given your background, given your involvement in the oil and gas industry, I just think that very clearly what is happening in the Gulf of Mexico is just devastating, and it is something that must not be repeated.
And so what do you think that's going to do to the oil industry?
Well, I think that, you know, I think clearly, I mean, if the stories that you hear are true, and I don't know if they were, that there could have been an alternative well put in place, that there was an electronic automatic turnoff that could have happened. I think it's going to have a substantial effect on the rules and regulations. And when you're a Canadian and you think, I've spent a lot of time, much later on, I worked as a seaman on the Beaufort and on the Mackenzie and in the Arctic. I think very clearly when you realize just how fragile that the Arctic is, I think that the rules and regulations are going to have to be thoroughly reviewed, and they're going to have to be made in Canada.
It's almost ironic because, you know, the Pembina Institute was founded 25 years ago based on arguably one of the largest industrial accidents in Canadian history, and that was the sour gas blowout at Lodgepole, Alberta, which has amazing relationship to what you just said.
Well, it does, and let me just follow up on that. I mean, I believe very strongly in the Canadian oil and gas industry. I think that they have been responsible. I think that it's a very important part of our economy, and I think that we want it to continue. I think that part of that continuation are people like Pembina. I mean, that one of the reasons that I agreed to do this is that I have been so impressed by both Pembina's research, but also by its desire to work with everybody to make this work. I've got to say, I think that Pembina has played a very important role in Canada, and I think it's played a very important role both on the environmental side and on the oil and gas side because of the quality of your research. When I was in government, I can tell you, I read the Pembina reports, and in fact, I knew a lot of the Pembina people. They would come and we would sit down. A number of them were friends of mine. You know a number of them, and I mean, those discussions were very healthy. When you're in government, you get the views, Minister of Finance or Prime Minister, you get the views from your department or from PCO, and you get the alternate views from other parts of government. But the ability to be able to reach outside and speak to people who also have a different perspective or come at it in a different way is very important if they have done the basic research. And if, while they're advocates and very strong advocates, that advocacy is based on something substantial. And I think that's really where Pembina has been very, very strong. My experience with Pembina has been in many ways through the people that I've met who have been involved with Pembina over the time. Obviously somebody is a very good choice of people or the good people gravitate to Pembina. But in either case, they have had a huge influence on me as we have gone through. The ability to talk an issue through with them. Pembina advocates that nobody should deny that, and in fact it's a very good thing that they do it. But advocacy which is based on very sound perspective and understanding that sometimes there has to be a balance here is essential. The easiest thing in the world is to simply say to the politicians, well, it's all black and white, and either you do it our way or the highway. Well, that doesn't get you very far. But people who say, look, this is what has to be done, and never give up, and they push, but it's based on sound research, and they understand that there are sometimes politicians are hamstrung and that they can't move as quickly as advocates would like, and that you don't have to accept it, but that you understand it, and then you say, let's work this out, let's make it happen. And I think the fact that Pembina started in the oil and gas industry, as I said to you earlier, I am a great supporter of the oil and gas industry. I think that it's an essential part of our industry. But as with any other industry, there are things that they have to do if they're going to protect the environment. And I think that the fact that Pembina has been at the center of that and has never given up, I think is very, very important for the country.
Well, thank you very much. Mr. Martin, last question. What do you see as the most important sustainability issue going into the future? What is the thing that you and us and everyone needs to work on together right now?
Well, look, there are so many issues. I mean, climate change in many ways tends to dwarf them. But I'm going to go back, and I guess my answer will surprise you, but I'm going to go back to the environmental indicators. Like it or not, we measure, and policy is made by measurement. The constant focus on the gross domestic product is an example of that thing. So the real issue is there are a wide range of environmental issues out there. Some very big, like climate change. Others are perhaps smaller. Many of them are local. My view is that if public policy can measure it, and if public policy can lay in front of Canadians or lay in front of the world the results of that measurement, so you can either judge progress or the lack of progress, that is the way you will get the greatest amount of change. I think my own view is that will also, by the way, that ability to measure and then that ability to have confidence in that measurement will really make people act. I mean, just think, I'll go back to it. Take a look at the Eurozone crisis, the crisis going on right now. Everything you see is measured. Everything that, they're measuring the inability to roll over X amount of debt. They're doing it within how much debt can you roll over within what period of time. They're measuring debt to GDP. They're measuring deficit. All of that. That's what's caused the huge amount of pressure, because all of a sudden people are projecting 3 months and 3 years ahead of time, and they're saying, my God, we've got to deal with this. Just think in terms of climate change or any other environmental issue that you want. Just think if those kinds of measurements were front and center in the environment the way they are in finance. I think we'd be a lot further ahead than we are now.
Mr. Martin, thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure, and we really appreciate you taking the time.
Well, I really enjoyed it, and thank you. And thank Pembina.
Thank you.
Okay.